Welcome everybody to this much changed and postponed and delayed meeting, and we're glad to actually get together key people from Ministry of Data Research UK and from ONS to talk about recent and current developments and future developments. And I know people are still joining the meeting, but we can't wait any longer. And I'm very pleased to welcome Emma Gordon, who is Director of the Ministry of Data Research UK Strategic Hub and of Ministry of Data Research England. I hope I've got that right. Key person in this field, who's going to talk to us about how Administrative Data Research UK has been developing from the start and up to now. So hand over to Emma.
Thanks very much, Alison. And just to let you know, the next speaker, the ONS speaker, won't be joining until 12:40. So I think my presentation is going to take about half an hour. So we've definitely got time for questions straight after my talk.
Right.
And we will have questions for joint time for joint questions after the ONS talk as well. So feel free to put your questions into the chat as you know they come to you, and we can answer them from the chat, or feel free to put your virtual hand up when we get to the Q&A as well, because I definitely want lots of questions. Okay, however difficult or tricky or straightforward, whatever, I definitely want your questions.
And I would just add that we are recording the questions, the chat, and so there will be opportunity for written response after the meeting. So please put your questions in the chat, and back to Emma.
Thanks very much. And yeah, so I'm just going to share some slides and I'll run through those, and yeah, we'll take it from there. So, okay, has that come through now?
Yes, sure.
Excellent. Okay, so we started the ADR UK program in 2018. So yeah, it's been going for a few years now, and so this is an update on where we've got to and what we've delivered so far, what our approach is, and what the future is looking like, and that will be picked up again by the ONS presentation as well. So what is the program? Well, we're fundamentally, we've changed the landscape for how researchers can access linked administrative data to support research. So we've had thousands of people accessing our data. Back in 2018, we started from a very low base of essentially, so ONS is our major data infrastructure partner and is the data infrastructure partner for ADR England. And back in 2018, I think they had around 63 data sets that were available through the Secure Research Service, and they were predominantly ONS survey data sets. And that's now up to something like 135 data sets, something like that. And it's all available on a very nice metadata catalogue that we've funded the development of. And a lot of those new data sets that have come online since 2018 are administrative data sets from other parts of government. And when I say government in the context of ADR England, I'm talking about sort of Whitehall government departments, essentially. So as well as facilitating data access to administrative data sets through the ONS Secure Research Service, and that's a free at the point of use service for all researchers. We also fund some research, and that's primarily based around research questions that government departments tell us can definitely be answered from the linked data that we're making available, but also that they're really interested in knowing the answers to. And so we also facilitate conversations between the academics and the government departments once that research is being delivered, so that they know what the outcomes of that research have been. So they're getting some direct benefit from collaborating with us in opening up access to linked administrative data. And our latest annual report was published just last month, and that is available on our website. Our website is adruk.org, and there's loads of stuff on there. Please do take a look if you're interested. So this is an organogram giving a summary of our setup. So this is essentially to point out that in the 3 devolved administrations, we give core funding to both academic and government partners to collaborate, to work together to not only make the data available, but carry out some key pieces of research that those devolved administrations are kind of the most pressing policy questions. It's feeding into that research base. ADR England is set up differently just because it's such a complex landscape, and the model that we've got to that really works is instead of core funding to individual academic groups and government departments, to make sure that we're sort of spreading ourselves wisely, if you like, and targeting where we're most wanted, we fund individual projects either to link the data and do the formative research on that and make it available, or we also fund research fellowships, again targeted at the research questions that are most pressing to Whitehall departments. And then underpinning this, as I say, ONS is our major data infrastructure partner. We've got data infrastructure partners in the 3 devolved administrations as well, but we've also got the SafePod network, and I'll come back to that in a little bit more detail in a couple of slides' time. So what is administrative data? It's essentially all of the interactions that people have with public services through the administrative system. So this might be through the tax system, the benefits system, also information that's recorded about educational outcomes. And for our purposes, we also count census responses as administrative data. Obviously, that's a massive survey, essentially, but it's also incredibly valuable for us to be able to link to, because it's got really important variables in, such as self-reported ethnicity. And when you can link across to that from other data sets, that's incredibly valuable. And we are entirely topic neutral, so we do include health data as well. And within ADR England, it has been tricky to open up access to linked administrative and health data sets, and I'm touch on that at the end of my talk. I'm very happy to answer any questions about that as well, but it is absolutely within our brief to open up access to that data. So why were we formed? We came off the back of a program called ADRN, Administrative Data Research Network, that ran until 2017. And whilst that did have some success in the devolved administrations in pairing up academics with government to collaborate and to carry out policy relevant research, it really the model that ESRC was funding back then to support engagement with Whitehall departments really fundamentally didn't work, and it was for many reasons, one of which a really key reason was that we didn't yet have the Digital Economy Act passed, and that's the permissive legal gateway that gives research access to administrative data. So we're having to rely on sort of various odd pieces of legislation, and that really didn't allow this facilitation of linkage across government departments to open up access to data. And that's really where our sort of the benefit that we can add comes in. So we do have the Digital Economy Act passed, and we do very much rely on that within ADR England. And we also, the other reason why it's complex is just the jigsaw picture of how administrative data is managed across the UK. And it effectively, because it comes out of public services, it effectively follows devolved topics. So topics like health and education are entirely devolved. So that data collection is split 4 ways across the UK. And something like tax collection is the opposite. It's centralised, and it's HMRC that run it on behalf of the whole of the UK. And then things like justice data sit in the middle, so MOJ service England and Wales, and then there's separate organisations that manage Scotland and Northern Ireland, and so on. So essentially the picture is really complex, but this is also why it was actually easier for the devolved administrations to make progress under previous programmes, because they were already in control of the data that they were wanting to make available, whereas it's individual departments that we've got to negotiate within England to open up access to this data. So I said I'd come back to the point about sort of access to data and the SafePod network. This map is our sort of sticking plaster to how we manage the fact that a lot of the data that we're talking about across the UK is available either only in Wales, Northern Ireland, Scotland, or ONS. It's not available across the UK in one place. So our answer is the SafePod network, which these are essentially secure rooms hosted in university libraries, and you can sit in a secure room in a university library and access all 4 of the trusted research environments data. And the secure rooms are there to support the access to the most sensitive data, and we very much collaborate with data owners in terms of how they want to work with us. But we also, all 4 trusted research environments, support home access as well. And obviously through the pandemic, that was incredibly important. And that's how we were able to support a lot of the COVID related analysis through our data infrastructure partners across the UK. So this is a very simplified diagram showing how we work with government. And as I touched on before, I see the sort of USP where we can most helpfully facilitate government departments is opening up access to linked data from across different government departments, because even within government they find this very tricky, because one government department has to take responsibility for another's data, and then how do they open up access to that securely for research purposes? Well, our response to that is through the ONS Secure Research Service, and that's really useful to government departments, because then effectively the data is never having to leave the civil service, and it's transferring it from one civil service organisation to another, which really helps with sort of data governance conversations. And then it's portal access to the Secure Research Service to gain access to it. And as I touched on before, we also have a role in facilitating these conversations with researchers to make sure that that evidence gets back into these policy departments, because what used to happen, what is the kind of default model, if you like, is an academic will analyse this data, publish a really interesting paper in an academic journal, and the policy department know nothing about it. I'm exaggerating slightly, but it's I worked in the civil service for many years, and I never had access to external journals. So there's this kind of Chinese wall that goes up between the research evidence and the people needing to know about that evidence. So that's why we go to great lengths to make sure we set up those conversations. And this is quite a busy diagram demonstrating the data linkages that we've already made available through ADR England. And as you can see, there's a lot of red blobs in there. That's all of the Ministry of Justice data that we've made available, and that's through a programme called Data First that we fund. And what was really lovely about the ADR UK programme when it started was it was MOJ who came knocking on our door to say, we've got over 50 different streams of administrative data coming into the department. We can't make sense of it. There's no individual identifiers. There's a lot of repetition in the data. We can't make sense of it. If you pay us to make sense of it, we'll make it all available to external researchers and make sure it's linkable across all of the various different parts of the court system. So that's exactly how we work with them. We fund a really tight, efficient team within Ministry of Justice to work with us, and all of this data is now being made available to researchers. And you'll see down here in the bottom right hand side of the slide a link to the Courts and Arbitration Service data for England and Wales, which is really important data. And this data is actually available through SAIL databank in ADR Wales, because that's where the CAFCAS data for England and Wales is already previously accessible through Nuffield funding. And you'll also see from this diagram that the National Pupil Database, which is a DFE database, is at the centre of a lot of the linkages. And we're really, really pleased that DFE have collaborated with us to support so many different linkages to their data. And up until now, they've never sort of asked for a penny from ADR UK to support this, because they've always had a history of opening up access to data to support research. But from January 2023, we will be funding DFE, because us and them recognise that actually we've been placing a huge burden on DFE resources by asking them to do all of this additional work. And we're going to be funding a sort of long-term project for them to be able to move over to the use of the digital economy out for all of the linked data sets. And in turn, that will allow them to pass over a lot of the procedural work in assessing applications to ONS, which will free up DFE resource to be able to concentrate on the more complex data requests, potentially requiring further data linkage. This is an even more complex diagram. This illustrates through our latest round of funding that we've handed out to support further data linkages. These are the data linkages that will be made available to researchers over the coming years, in addition to the ones that we've already got made available. So you'll see here lots of yellow blobs coming in. Those are all the ones that are related to health and wellbeing data sets. And again, I'll touch on that. It's been a really complex journey in sort of getting agreement to open up access to those data sets and do the linkages, but we are sort of slowly making progress there. And we've also, you see that census data is being linked to many more data sets, and we're bringing in personal pension contribution data from HMRC as well. And so loads going on, and do sign up to our newsletter that you can do through the website if you want to find out when those data sets are being made available. So lessons learned from previous investments. The incentives need to be there for government to engage. I touched on the issues that ADRN, the programme that came before us, sort of ran into. So their model it was entirely ESRC sort of decision. That their model was that it would be the academics funded to do all of the work, not giving any funding to government departments. And actually that doesn't work, because a lot of the fundamental issues are around government departments not having access, sort of research ready access to their data. So by opening up the ability for us to be able to fund them to make that data available, it's really unblocked a lot of the conversations that were happening previously, and it's been a really constructive way to move forward. And again, it's setting up these mechanisms that whereby it becomes a lot more normal for academics to engage with government departments, and for those government departments to be ready to receive that input into sort of policy, informing policy decisions. And another part of the model is that under ADRN, my team, the strategic hub that sits directly within ESRC, and I'm an ESRC employee, my team didn't exist, but it was seen as there's some things about the programme that if they fail, they fundamentally fail for the entire programme. And things like that, owning the relationships with the government departments, was seen as too fundamental, and it was too risky to hand out to any one academic team. It's not that academics can't do it, it's just more difficult for them to have that conversation rather than a central team having it on behalf of the entire programme. So it's my responsibility to own that, obviously in collaboration with ONS as a major data infrastructure partner. And having ONS there and having the Digital Economy Act really works. What also works in our engagement with government departments is this idea of building curated data sets. And that not only works because it's efficient, in terms of the data linkages don't have to be redone every time somebody wants to access the data, but it also allows us to work with the data owners to make sure that the governance processes and the application processes are in place, and so that every single researcher can follow the same process through, and that helps setting precedents, which speeds up decision making, and the whole thing starts moving a lot more smoothly. And it's also go on to the vision that we started with that is now being realised. We are fundamentally helping to resolve data access issues across government. That's within government as well as for external researchers. And we've come up with this model that it's a very straightforward pitch to government departments, academics, members of the public, everybody, about how we open up access to data. And that in turn is helping to build trust. And at the end of the day, without trust, you can't get anywhere doing this kind of thing. And it's building those trustful relationships up with people and sort of moving forward on that basis that has really helped us. And so this is an example of a data set. You'll all remember during the pandemic, the issues around what happened when exams couldn't go ahead in England as they were supposed to. And there was a lot of work done by the various different education organisations to support decision making around which exam grades children should be assigned to, and all of that came onto a massive amount of scrutiny. Well, all the different data owners within kind of 6 months of all of that decision making being complete actually worked with us and ONS to support research access to a linked database that includes all of that information about how those exam decisions were made, and all of that is available to researchers. And because we had all of the infrastructure and all the processes in place that could move very swiftly through the system. And I'm giving that as an example of how far we've come. If we tried to do that back in 2018, it would have taken far longer, but we can absolutely step up and do these things in a small number of months rather than years now, because we've got tried and tested processes in place. Another example is the longitudinal education outcomes dataset, and the linked data for England we have now made available to researchers. And this is an example of a really complex linked data set that's over 140 different tables of data from across HMRC, DWP, DFE and HESA, tracking educational outcomes of children through to adulthood, to look at so you can assess their benefits and income in adult life. And the incredibly rich data set, but those departments couldn't find a way of systematically opening up access to that data. Essentially, the sort of sticking plaster method that was being used was to second researchers into DFE so that they were effectively DFE members of staff. That's obviously not sustainable, and you can't scale that model up. And it's a heck of a lot of work for DFE to sort of maintain and manage. So the mechanism we have now is this data is available to researchers through the ONS Secure Research Service using the Digital Economy Act, which is this, overarching permissive legislation that opens up access to data for research. And the comparable data sets across other parts of the UK are also now being made available to researchers. This is an example, I touched on MOJ already briefly, but this is an example of a data set where a whole suite of linked data sets from across, family courts, criminal courts, magistrates, prison services, everything, and it's all linkable to each other, and it's all available to access through researchers. And these are all the data sets apart from the family courts data. MOJ, before we supported this work, MOJ didn't have access to this data, so it's been a win-win for all sides. Very, very briefly touch on the SAIL data bank, because they don't have this model of a kind of pre-linked curated data set that was the model that we kind of stuck with within England to entice data owners to work with us. Their model, and I'd say they've got on the maturity scale, they're at the kind of very mature end of how this type of data can be opened up to access to researchers, because the model that they've got is they use a trusted third party, which is the Welsh equivalent of NHS Digital, and all identifiable information about people is sort of goes through their system and gets delivered to SAIL in two sets. So you have the attribute data that is de-identified, and then you have an anonymized linkage field attached to that attribute data, and it's that anonymized linkage field that allows it to automatically be linkable to anything else that's held in the SAIL data bank about those people. So the vast majority of data that SAIL hold is about the Welsh population, but they do hold some data on the English population as well, such as the CAFCAS data. And it was that meant that MOJ were happy to also work with SAIL to open up access to linked family courts data with that CAFCAS data, to really so that researchers can really scrutinise what's happening in the family courts, and yeah, incredibly valuable, and really looking forward to seeing the research that comes out of this linkage. Just to touch on the health data again, I still don't feel like we've got a really sort of scalable, systematic way of opening up access to linked health and administrative data within England. We do in other parts of the UK, for example, in Wales. But in England, I think we've been sort of stymied a little bit by the legislation, and also because it's quite narrow. It was quite narrow, the remit under which NHS Digital could open up access to data for research, in that it was very much tied to for the improvement of NHS services, which the stuff that I'm talking about is the stuff that means that, you know, you can look at how a child's health outcomes might impact on education outcomes. And for a child, those two things are intimately linked, because if a child can't access education because of their health conditions, that's fundamentally impacting the quality of their life. And that's the type of work that we will be able to do when we open up access to what's called the eChild dataset, which is 20 plus years of education outcomes data linked to hospital episode statistics data. The data is all in the Secure Research Service already, and the UCL team that we funded to support the creation of this data asset have had access to it for some time, but they're also supporting us to work with NHS Digital to open up wider access. And we have DHSC have updated the Health and Social Care Act to broaden the remit for NHS Digital for working with researchers. That's only just happened in the last sort of few weeks, but once NHS Digital have completed their sort of reorganisation that they're going through with NHS England, they will be assessing how that can support wider use of health data for England, particularly with reference to link to administrative data. And just to touch on the changes that we've made as a result of sort of our pilot phase of ADR UK that we ran from 2018 to 21, and then we got long-term funding, £105 million through to 2026. And the two elements of the programme that we realise actually we need to own and step up and own centrally, as well as, you know, supporting our programmes and projects to deliver, is public engagement and training and capacity building, because it's not enough to open up access to this data. We also need to support people in working out how to analyse these really complex data sets. And public engagement, we did a really good piece of public dialogue work over the summer, and that was done in collaboration with the Office for Statistics Regulation, and it was really around the public's understanding of, when we all talk about doing research in the public good, which is underpinned by the use of the Digital Economy Act for opening up access to this data, what do the public mean by that? And is it good enough that, you know, that those decisions are made without them, or do they think that they need to be part of that conversation? That came out with an incredibly rich set of recommendations that ourselves and OSR are now considering. But please do check out that report on our website. If you just put public in the search function, it'll come up straight away. But yeah, incredibly rich and useful for us, but also it helped, it endorsed our approach for opening up access to this data in many respects, but definitely asked us to go much further in terms of how we engage with the public in these decisions. Around training and capacity building, we've got a whole suite of things that we're taking forward under this strand of our work. And again, there's a training capacity building strategy that's published on our website. I'll very briefly touch on the creation of synthetic data, because that's something that we've been exploring in quite some detail. There's a couple of reports on our website about that. And we've been considering it in terms of, and this is very much in collaboration with the data owners, but we've been considering it in terms of how that can speed up the researcher journey to being able to access the data. So at the moment, this is how it works. So you've got all the data governance work that has to happen before anybody gets access to the data. And then the researchers look at it and assess, oh, actually, yes, it is useful for my work, or oh, it's not exactly what I thought it would be. And then they start writing their code and all the rest of it and generating results. What we're thinking about is the creation of low fidelity synthetic data. So it's the most, for the most risk averse departments, you can understand why they might not want the creation of high fidelity synthetic data sets which maintain the statistical relationships between the variables out there for sort of anybody to download. But if you don't maintain the statistical relationships between the variables, but all of the variables are coded up to look like real data, then actually that supports researchers being able to put together much more constructive and relevant proposals to access to the data. And also it helps them because they can start writing their code even before they get access to the data, and it speeds up the whole timeline. So that's a specific example that we're looking at. Further enhancements that we're looking at, and James from ONS will be touching on some of these topics as well in terms of the integrated data service that they're building at the moment. But we are funding work to support research fellows doing evaluations of policies and programs using administrative data, because we see this as being a really rich source for government departments to be able to kind of really make best use of this data, because there's not a lot of natural experiments you can do there. We also want to facilitate better sharing of codes and concepts across researchers working on data, so that they're not all having to start from the same place. If they just want to build on what others have done, we want to be able to facilitate that. And as I say, we're looking at further ways to streamline the researcher journey whilst maintaining all of the security aspects. But fundamentally, the biggest change I see coming with the integrated data service is a move to modern cloud-based infrastructure as a back end for how all of this data is accessed. Because at the moment, Secure Research Service is working on quite old, quite clunky technology, and that will be a vast improvement. And last but most definitely not least, we're also funding PhD studentships to be able to work on this data. And how long has this all taken? It certainly started way before I started getting involved in 2018. In December 2018. So before that, we had the Administrative Data Research Program Network, and before that, the Administrative Data Task Force. And if all of these things hadn't happened first, we would not be where we are today. So I very much want to acknowledge all of the efforts of all of the people that have gone before us to make this a success today. And that's everything. So I'll stop sharing and then I'll be able to see the chat, and very happy to answer any questions as I say. So
well, thank you very much, Emma. We were told that James was going to join us at 12:40. It is 12:40, so is James online yet? Our next speaker.
I can definitely start answering questions.
Yes,
and
well,
then
we'll have the first question to Emma while we give James a bit more time to get in. And so if you would put your hands up in the, do you want to start on what's in the chat?
Yeah, I'm very, very happy to start with those. Yeah, so Martine's questions: how are you considering time series data? Does each department consider their own year-to-year linkages, or are we bringing in linking each year's data separately? So at the moment, we've got this concept of the curated data set. So it entirely depends on the department's appetite to consider how much we want to go back to sort of more historical years of data and how much they want to concentrate on getting the data right for more recent years. So in terms of eChild, as I say, that's over 20 years of data, so that you can follow through cohorts of children through that data set into adulthood. With the MOJ data, it's more recent, just because that came from a position of not having any data available, but they are doing annual updates. The integrated data service will work in a slightly different model once it's fully up and running, in that every data set that comes in, the idea is that it's indexed and linkable to everything else. So the kind of clunkiness that we sort of built into our model, which is inevitable because of how we've engaged with departments, will start to kind of smooth out, if you like, as we go forward. Next question from Julia: are the linkages all done in ONS? So it depends. So under the Digital Economy Act, researchers can't be given access to any personal identifiers, which essentially means academics can't be do the linkage directly themselves. But if you take something like the MOJ Data First programme, we're funding the team in MOJ, and that I would absolutely put them up as data linkage experts. They're published in academic journals and everything about the methods that they've developed to be able to do this work. So they work out all of the how to link each of the files, and then sort of files to be able to link from one another are made available to researchers as well. But we do fund, within each data linkage project that we fund academics and government departments. So the project might be led by one or the other, but they have to engage with the other side. So even if it's a data set where it's ONS that are doing the linkage, they have to engage with academics to make sure that we're getting those insights and that expertise and experience fed through into the process, if that makes sense. Next question from Piers: how are we working with government departments to ensure that policy changes don't impact on the usefulness of the data? That's a really tricky one. And I'd say that is kind of beyond our remit, if you like. This is not kind of the quality of survey data where you can sort of mitigate for those things. It's more kind of what you see is what you get. But I would say that on the flip side, opening up research access to administrative data does help us drive up the quality of the administrative data that's come through. And we have seen that happen, for example, with the MOJ data. Next question from yourself, Alison: is there any prospect of bringing health data into the Digital Economy Act? I would love that. I'm pitching that at every opportunity. I would say I understand entirely why it's not there at the moment, and that's a very long conversation. But for myself, I think there's actually a lot of benefits to health data being accessible through the Digital Economy Act, because of this thing that you are not allowed to give access to personal identifiers through the Digital Economy Act. It opens up a whole new route to looking at de-identified health data, which actually there doesn't seem to be a straightforward legal route to support that type of access. And actually that's, for a lot of researchers, that's all they need to be able to look at the attribute data. So I personally see a lot of benefits there for NHS Digital and the public in being assured of the security of the data. Next question is one very close to my heart, and thanks for this, Maddie. So can we facilitate linkage to large ONS survey data to routine health, DWP and HMRC data? So as one of the benefits of the COVID pandemic, awful as it was a platform was stood up whereby it's called the UK Longitudinal Linkage Collaboration, and it was stood up so that you could link a lot of the social survey data that's held within the UK to health data, so that you can look at, you understand the whole history of people, their socio-economic background, their ethnicity, their age, their family context, and then you could stick on the linkages to whether they had COVID, whether they died of COVID, whether they'd had vaccinations. We're now looking at, we've given that platform short-term funding to assess whether they can now open that up for wider linkages, so that the 3 departments we're starting with, and this is the order that the linkages are going to happen in, is DFE, HMRC and DWP, but we're also looking into ways that we can provide long-term funding for that platform, because absolutely that's a job that is far too big for our programme, and within ESRC we recognise it's a gap within our data infrastructure. So yeah, that as I say, that is one of the massive benefits that's come out of all of the COVID research related funding, and very much looking forward to them taking that forward. I should probably stop now, because now we've got James. I'll stop waffling on, but very happy to come back to any more questions at the end. Thank you.
To say welcome James, who's now joined us, and he's head of engagement for the Integrated Data Service. When he and his colleague have spoken, we'll then go to another area of questions. So we should have a discussant, but I can't actually see him online at the moment. So with no more ado, hand over to James Hartley-Binns.
Thank you, Alison, and nice to see you again since RC22. George, thanks for sharing the slides there. My apologies for being slightly late. I've been presenting in other conferences. So as Alison says, I'm James Hartley-Binns, and I'm head of program engagement for the Integrated Data Service. There's kind of 3 pillars to my team in particular: this sort of program engagement, engaging with you, the analytical community, the insights gathering that we infer from that in terms of the data or the analytical tooling that we might want to sort of bake back into the service, or we might want to acquire, and then also sort of a prospect feasibility element to maintain maintenance of a kind of a backlog of potential projects that we might be able to run as the service evolves and becomes more BAU. So my team responsible for sharing the good work related to IDS, hence why I'm with you good people today, but also keen to strike up that two-way conversation aimed at understanding, as I say, the data requirements, analytical requirements with our partners across government and the wider analytical community. So we can move on to the next slide. The purpose of the Integrated Data Service, and you'll see this strapline a lot with IDS, and it's being delivered obviously through the Integrated Data Service programme, is to bring together ready-to-use data to enable faster and wider collaborative analysis for the public good. Always that element of the public good is by bringing together and indexing data sets from across government and the analytical community to enable deeper and more targeted analysis to better support policymakers, essentially. The strategic importance of IDS comes as an enabler of the government's ambition for better use of data to help inform improved policy decisions. There's an ever increasing demand, as we all know, for enhanced data sharing, data integration, data linkage, and for deeper and more timely analysis, which the IDS is an enabler of. This has been met by increased efforts from analysts across government and beyond to improve the speed and rigour of statistical information to inform evidence-based policy development and evaluation. And a key objective of IDS is to enable that faster but also lower cost analysis for government and the analytical community through streamlined data processes and departmental collaboration, of which we'll talk about through this presentation. And it's worth noting, quite importantly, that the Office for National Statistics is leading the delivery of IDS, but in collaboration with our partners across government. And it should not be underestimated the important role that the wider analytical community, yourselves in particular, will play in helping to develop and enhance our service. So we move on to the next slide, which looks at the strategic fit of IDS. So as this slide suggests, IDS is heavily linked into, and you wouldn't be surprised, but the wider digital data transformation landscape. And the programme is very proactive, I must say, in engaging across government and the analytical sector to ensure that strategic alignment with these initiatives is met. To this end, the programme is working with CDDO, Central Digital Data Office, and CITSEN, National Situation Centre, to identify synergies between the architecture and consistency of standards and metadata for multiple uses, where appropriate and possible. Similarly, the programme will provide the underpinning capability for cross-departmental analysis of data assets already created. So this includes BOLD, Better Outcomes Through Linked Data, I think that stands for, which is an MOJ programme, and DEFRA's Data Analysts and Science Hub Dash, some of you might be aware of. And the intention of for these is that they should be made available through the IDS once the service is in a position to do so. And there are many other programmes like this as well, where we seek to make them available through IDS. And also, if you hadn't guessed already, IDS is a GMPP, Government Major Projects Portfolio, progress of which is reported into number 10, usually, I believe, on a quarterly basis. So moving on. In terms of the national data strategy, the government is trying to be more data-driven in its policy making, as I've stated. To this end, the programme is a key enabler of the government's national data strategy. In particular, I believe it's mission 3, which states to enable government to make better use of its own data. Sharing data within government should be, one would think easy, but it's evidently not. IDS is also a strategic data exchange, a key strategic data exchange programme for CDDO's digital and data strategy. Again, mission 3, which states that departments will work to make 100% of those critical data assets available and in use across government through trusted application programming interfaces, those APIs, and platforms such as Government Data Exchange and through the IDS. Secondly, the departments agree to co-develop and adopt a single data ownership model for critical data assets. And we're doing a lot of work in that within data growth and operations in IDS through the integrated data asset frameworks, which are sort of in early stages at the moment, but they're being drawn up. Departments, thirdly, will ensure that 50% of the high priority quality data issues are resolved within a defined period. And finally, CDDO, with the help of departments, will create a data marketplace with a data catalogue, standards, governance models, etc., to rival the best practice across public and private sectors, enabling better management and governance of data. And furthermore, the programme is a critical component of the Declaration on Government Reform. I think it was published in July of last year, I think it was, where about working across government better, sharing data across government. And of course, IDS is a key enabler of that. And we're working hard to try and achieve some of the mission statements set out within that document. So in terms of the challenge on the next slide, to achieve what we need to achieve in IDS, it's going to require a cultural shift. No underestimation of that. So having 23 ministerial departments, 3 devolved administrations, 20 non-ministerial departments who will collect, store, publish their own data, it risks vast amounts of duplication. It's no easy thing to change quickly, no easy mindset to change quickly. But that said, IDS has a level of ministerial and cabinet office buy-in not previously seen, and is underpinned by significant financial settlement. And to deliver IDS, it needs to be a trusted research environment, not TRE, but a trusted research environment across government and the analytical community, with the ability to link data, provide technology that is scalable with no limits to storage, consistent metadata, and we all know there's problems with that, and part of the IDAF work we're doing feeds into that, and also ensure sound legal gateways. Our solution will deliver on these while serving, always keen, and I've heard this in the previous conversation, the public good. So if we look at the next slide and who is IDS for and how does it work? Moving on, in terms of who the service is designed for, is quite similar to the Secure Research Service, the SRS, which many of you will probably be aware of. So, government analysts, devolved administrations, accredited researchers from academia, science community and the like, all of you will have access. The primary focus, whilst the platform has been in development, has been on those government analysts. But once we achieve DEA accreditation, this will change, enabling more collaborative analysis with the onboarding of researchers from across the wider analytical community. And fundamentally, that will help us in our user research. And in terms of the platform, there are two key arms that I think it's important to sort of make distinction between for IDS. There's the analytical platform on one side, which uses a multi-cloud solution where users can run strategic bite-sized analysis. R and Python is the analytical tooling there, but scope to develop that further. And on the other arm, there is the dissemination side, which is sort of more advanced at this stage, which uses a gov.uk web addresses to make outputs publicly available if requested. Would sort of entice you to have a look at the COP27 platform, which is a dissemination platform that's recently been published, climatechangeportal.gov.uk, I think it is. If I find the link, I'll drop it in the chat or send it with the slides afterwards. And the dissemination arm of the platform is about having a tool baked into the service which enables users to visualize the outputs directly, which we all know is not something we currently have in the SRS. And as I say, an early iteration is the Climate Change Portal, COP26 originally, which was very successfully shown at that conference, and as I say, updated for COP27. But moving on to accreditation. So, hopefully none of this will come as a surprise. All users must first apply for individual accreditation through a new streamlined process. That's from 37 questions down to 11 before access to data is given. You do not need to apply if you have existing accreditation. I believe once you get accreditation, it lasts for 5 years. Applicants are required to watch a safe researcher training video, complete that, pass the assessment before being provided with their accredited researcher number. And once individuals are accredited, they can apply for access to data, obviously for the specific purposes, through the RAS system, Research Accreditation System. The access request will then obviously be reviewed and accredited by the appropriate decision-making body for that data. Could be ONS, could be other government departments, unless of course there's an agreement that we would take on that granting responsibility on their behalf if it's delegated as such. Initially, as I say, could be the data owner, could be ONS in the long term once we build that trusted relationship with the data owner. So moving on, you might be wondering, how well, it's all very well and good, but how is IDS similar to sort of existing solutions? Well, it will operate on a similar framework to the 5 safes, as the slide suggests. IDS will use a similar process to data access as the SRS, i.e., as I say, only accredited researchers with accredited projects. The 5 safes framework will inform each stage of the user journey, which there's lots of work going on to developing that now. And IDS will use the Digital Economy Act, DEA, for accreditation purposes. And I want to stress here that our commitment is that IDS will never reveal any of the public information about themselves, their families, businesses, their lives, meaning that firstly, IDS obviously follows best practice. Individuals will never be identified. Private details obviously won't become public, and data held will only ever be used to serve the public good, which is obviously an underlying theme in all of our research. And worth mentioning at this point that there is no plan, as I've mentioned the SRS a few times, there's no plan to close down the SRS. Obviously, there will be a natural transition as work is concluded in the SRS and eventually begun in the IDS, and sort of timelines are being worked out in terms of the strategic look at that vision now. But as I say, no kind of final switch off date as such. So if we move on to the access process, and looking in particular at the historical sort of data model. So fundamentally, what are the problems that the integrated data service is looking to solve? Well, anybody who's worked within the data or digital domain, but particularly the data domain, will recognise the familiar problems with obtaining access to highly relevant data, the lack of integrated data, which could support better policy decisions, or potentially the ability to run bite-sized analysis. And this slide demonstrates what we call the current linear project model and highlights the pain points in the middle there, 5 and 6, of data acquisition from an analyst or organizational point of view when either is looking to acquire data from another organization. So effectively, when a new policy question is identified, under the current model, a project goes through a lengthy process of writing up a project proposal, identifying the relevant data, and then obviously we seek to acquire it. It's here where we hit those pain points in the middle of the screen, which can severely slow down the pace of that project. Finally, the data might be made available, obviously for that specific project purpose. Analysis is run if the policy question is still relevant, that is, obviously, or might have to change significantly because the data acquisition process can take such a long time. Output's obviously disseminated, and then the project comes to a close. Obtaining that highly relevant data, particularly across governance, as I say, should be straightforward, but it's not. Lots of legal agreements, memorandums of understanding, legal frameworks that need to be adhered to. And crucially, as I say, in the middle, they're the pain points, and in a worst case scenario can result in it taking years for the ONS previously to acquire certain data. The LEO data took 4 years to acquire from DFE. Similarly, ONS acquiring data from DWP, HMRC, some of that took 5 to 7 years, I believe. There is also a public disbenefit in not having had that data more readily available in a format which could have assisted in better policy outcomes. So if we look to sort of the new model and what we're trying to do here, so how can we improve the current model? Well, first we need to re-examine the pain points, and we need to consider what we can do to reform the process to make these, how I like to see it, kind of almost an enabler of high quality rapid research rather than a prohibitor. So instead of acquiring a data set from ADRUK, DWP, HMRC, which, as I say, could take an awful long time to do, a lot of silo working, then what we would do is have that data available, linked, standardized, and be what we call research ready before the, oh, I'm sorry, the lights have gone out, before the policy question has presented itself. So therefore, if a policy question were to appear in the health and energy space, for example, then in future we would have all of these data assets readily available. The relevant body would then be able to make informed and rapid policy decisions. And the data can be put into, obviously, the desired project space quickly once a project proposal and accreditation have been approved. Analysis, as normal, is then undertaken in the secure environment. Outputs can be disseminated in a format of the analyst choosing. There's not sort of one size fits all with all of this, but it can be intuitive to what the analyst wants. And of course, as part of any potential project, there could be an element of having to acquire additional data to support the research proposal, kind of as the tactical model, the previous model that we've shown there. But the strength of IDS, not to be underestimated, comes from the iterative ability to grow over time, identifying those data, that strategic data, creating a richer, more complex and diverse data assets acquired for future purposes that is, as I say, ready to use for analysis. So in terms of the next slide in data acquisition, to this end, work is already ongoing to create a number of integrated data assets, IDAs as we are calling them. And this is in the space of equalities, levelling up, net zero, public health, jobs, skills, cost of living more broadly. These are critical data assets linked, standardised and indexed, which will be hosted centrally and can be shared widely to support the answering of policy questions as they arise. And to support the creation of these data sets, there's a lot of effort that's being put into identifying data sets of strategic importance. My team are having a number of conversations. I know there's further conversations that are being had. Data growth and operations within the ONS are having strategic level conversations as well to understand what data is important to be prioritised, negotiated and acquired and brought into IDS in a timely manner. And of course, we all know this, but there's a wealth of ONS owned data that we can already use from Census 2021, we'll talk about that in a bit, to the annual business survey. But there's also, and I see this from the previous conversation, demand for public health data as well. And and HMRC data, which comes as no surprise to us, and we're putting a lot of effort into eventually being able to bring some of that on, which will come in part with DEA accreditation. And from the screen, you can see here some of the data sets that we're currently in the process of acquiring. But on the next slide, again, all of the data acquired will be done to support that principle of working for the public good. And in this space, there are many policy areas that have been identified, from supply chains, critical, given our withdrawal from the European Union and the war that Russia has waged on Ukraine, how that impacts obviously supply chains. And obviously too, very serious at the moment, the economic crisis that the country faces, the result that has on the cost of living crisis, health and economic factors, how they are affected by all of these policy issues as well. So there's lots of work going on into that too. So in terms of the next slide, accessing and contributing data, if we look at the IDS data sources, and what we're talking about here is the access methods, essentially. So first we've got donate. This is akin to what we have in the SRS. Data is given to the ONS, resides within the IDS platform itself. Data owners give up control of the data from a technological perspective. All the technical controls are in place in the IDS platform itself. We hold the data on the data owner's behalf. When we get data from the owners, we're hosting it and providing access for research purposes on data owners' conditions. Secondly, we have, and then these two are quite exciting, I think, but enable, where data stays within the department, for example, Department of Education. It doesn't leave them, but it can be called upon using API into the integrated data service. Secondly, we have deposit, data hosted on a central cloud area and called upon by users. It's kind of like a halfway house, third-party landing zone. It is controlled by the data owner and the IDS platform. Data doesn't sit in the platform itself, but it can be linked and accessed. And crucially here, with any of these sort of methods, if you're an analyst or a researcher and you're logging into IDS, in time you'll be using one of these three mechanisms via a data virtualization layer. Users won't know whether they're accessing data, for example, within HMRC systems or DWP, ONS Cloud, or whether it's a data access platform. Quite frankly, users won't know, they won't care, it doesn't matter, as long as they're able to gain access to the data that they require through one of these data sources. And it's just worth mentioning here that enable, is the long-term vision for the program. Still keen, obviously, to deliver on that. Donate is the initial primary focus, obviously, while we're still in kind of that in those beta phases. But we see these three. Sorry, I should say that deposit. Actually, there's a lot of work that's going into the scoping of that now, with timelines to be assigned to that. But we see these three, as I say, data access methods as essential to driving the delivery of and the buy-in across the academic community and government for the programme. In the long term, of course, should result in IDS becoming the primary trusted research environment within government. And we're certainly making every effort to ensure that this is the case, not least because of the significant cost benefits that would be derived from that. So if we look at timelines, so as background to sort of the releases, it's worth perhaps just giving a bit of information. So in March of last year, I believe it was, we submitted the initial business case, and a lot of work went into that, as you can imagine, and this has just been very successfully refreshed. In October of 21, we had a multi-year settlement worth, I think it was about £250 million up until 2025. In January of this year, Google Cloud Platform was officially selected as the multi-cloud solution, and this replaced AWS, and this was obviously not an insignificant task. Government moving from one provider to another is certainly not easy, given some of the commercial issues that can cause, and we actually had to transition some early projects in their entirety across. So that went quite well, and we're quite pleased with what happened there in the end. But in terms of the IDS journey releases itself, our first release successfully went live with low sensitivity data sources made available as part of the new private beta, along with users from within selected government departments to help test use of the platform's very early beta phase. As capabilities expanded, the platform contained medium sensitivity data as part of the initial public beta with more established tooling. So these include R and Python analytical tools, and there's certainly potential opportunity for others going forward to be included. We also launched our website, ids.gov.uk, I think it is, and we had our branding agreed. So you see that in these slides now. Previously, it was quite ONS centric. Now we've clearly got our own identity, which is good. But next up, full public beta, I think this is really quite exciting. IDS will be the platform to house the full fat census, we're calling it, 2021 data. Work's going on to that at the moment. Platform should achieve DEA accreditation in March of next year, enabling us to access a wider range of data. And this will give the programme the ability to onboard users from the wider analytical community, which we've not been able to do at the moment from outside of government. IDS will also have a better support service, and the strategic migration of certain projects from SRS to IDS will have begun, and I sort of mentioned that earlier. So if we look at the second timeline, and this is sort of over a longer period, it's more strategic. So the programme fundamentally is split into kind of three parts, A, B and C. We're currently in phase A, where we will deliver public beta, successfully get DEA accreditation and deliver on some of that census work. Moving through to phase B, which is called the Integrated Data Service Plus, benefits of which primarily focus on that improved functionality, analytical capability, building those integrated data assets, which I've talked about, and understanding fundamentally the strategic data requirement across government and the analytical community, and building that into the platform. And then we move into phase C, which I think is quite exciting again, quite interesting. And this is where we open up usage to an even broader list of stakeholders, and we look to onboard commercial data such as credit card data into the service. And we're working with the Bank of England on a number of commercial data to be brought in as well. Early conversations, but they are being had. So in terms of the next slides and the benefits and successes to share, benefits, we've really been sort of talking about these throughout the presentation, and many, I would hope, are self-evident. So ultimately, from an analytical standpoint, what analysts will have is a much wider, high-quality data library available, which is research-ready and linkable, with an opportunity to use that dissemination tool, which is baked into the service, which again, I think is an exciting development. Significant financial benefits too, partly through those efficiency savings. So again, the data linkage element through those integrated data assets, if linked once and made readily available by IDS, that prevents several departments from having to work in silo, to link the data separately, to spend significant resources and finance in doing so. There are clear savings in terms of the commercial data too. So, we're aware, through no fault of their own, but certain government departments are acquiring the same data multiple times. And obviously IDS, we will seek to acquire that data once, which is clearly a significant cost saving. It does disrupt some of the data owners' funding models, but again, we're in early conversations with some of those data owners about, well, how we can make that work. But there's positive developments there. And the final area of benefit is obviously policy, which links with financial. Estimates we are working with are evidently broad at the moment. We are, as I say, in those beta phases, and we clearly make several assumptions in terms of some of those savings. But potentially we're looking in the hundreds of millions, bordering on billions potentially in terms of public savings once IDS begins to inform that public policy decision making on a more consistent basis. So if we go on to the penultimate slide. So quick key achievements, always good to sort of put these out there. One of the big successes is getting that Treasury support. They understand that we need to think strategically. We need to look several years ahead to deliver what is required, do that user research, have those conversations, those two-way conversations, and build that into the integrated data service. We're a long way off, obviously, being a BAU platform, but it's good to have that support from Treasury and to have achieved that settlement. There's a vote of confidence in what we are doing and enables us to plan ahead with that confidence. And I know that one of the directors of the programme is on the call, so hopefully he feels that way too. Again, that transition from Amazon to Google, which we've talked about, we're proud of that. It's no easy thing to do, but we achieved that in good time and with good feedback from our minimal users that are on the platform. As I said before, Climate Change Portal, please look at that. As I say, recently updated for COP27, excellent example of what will be available from the dissemination side of things. And we launched the IDS website in the summer as a minimal viable product, which will be ramped up as the service develops. Gives an indication of the kind of messaging we're going to be putting out there for future users of the service, and also as a public-facing website too. So on the final slide, brings us to an end of the presentation, but this is sort of my what I dubbed the JFK Lord Kitchener pitch. That's what IDS is, but what can you do for us? So for now, there are some very simple things you can do to ensure that IDS is a success, because it is a partnership. One is click on that link, and that take you through to a sign up to our monthly newsletter to keep you updated on the progress of IDS, which is moving quite rapidly. More broadly for IDS, well, for us to be a success and deliver for our partners, IDS needs to understand how we can engage with you more regularly. It might be through lunchtime seminars, directorates or team colleagues, information exchanges within teams, usual cascade meetings or cross-government meetings for those of you that are government analysts. Whatever those opportunities look like, we're really keen to be involved so that we can have that two-way conversation about the programme, understand your user requirements, disseminate the work that is ongoing, and understand those user research and opportunities for collaboration at every stage of IDS, because there's a lot of phases that we're going to be going through, and there's a lot of good work and information to share. Also interested to hear what you're doing now. So your research, your priorities in terms of policy. IDS wants to hear what you're working on, how we can, in the long term, support you, or if indeed you're building your own service, let's have a conversation to ensure that our systems are indeed compatible. So just finally to say thank you from me for the opportunity of talking to you today. Happy to take any questions. I will just caveat that saying that I'm not the technical architecture expert, but happy to take questions if I can, and I'll certainly go away and get any answers to any particularly difficult questions that might arise. So Alison, I'll pass back to you, and if you don't mind, rather than look like a vampire in the dark, I'll just very quickly press some buttons to make sure that the lights come back on.
Right, thank you very much indeed, James. There's a lot of material to present. And we've now got 11 minutes. I'm sure people have got a lot of questions, and we've got 11 minutes for you to answer them in. Emma didn't manage to get through all the questions to her. So first to say that the slides will be available on the RSS website. So that's sorry to make clear. That is also, we're saving the chat so that questions that you and Emma can't answer in the next 11 minutes can be answered. So if we can encourage people to put their questions in the chat so that can be saved, and we can get back to you on that.
I think I've managed to answer either all of the ones sort of verbally that came from my talk, or I've put the answers in the chat. So right. Hopefully I'm up to date, but I think there's a couple that I think 3 that have come in for James. So
yes, I think we should get James to answer the questions that then come in. And the first one is, how does the accreditation process, the IDS, align with that of the SRS, or are they the same?
My understanding, we talked about this, the streamlined accreditation service down from 37 questions to 11. My understanding, although Emma might know better than I, is that they align now. So I don't think there's any difference in terms of that accreditation process.
Right. And the next one is, who is the data controller in the secure area and the deposit option, supplier, ONS or joint?
Yeah, so again, I think hopefully we answered that question. So we will never just take on the ownership of the data unless we are asked to. In the deposit method, it still remains with the data owner, but we would obviously grant access on their conditions. So we unless there could be a that relationship becomes particularly strong, and we de facto take on the responsibility of granting control on that data owner's behalf. It remain the responsibility of the data owner.
Right. The next one I have to admit is from me asking, given that some of the furores that have broken out over the use of GP data and opt-out campaigns and a lot of misinformation actually being spread. Have you got strategic plan for answering that? For answering those
oh, God, Emma's put her hand up.
I'll take that one for you, James.
I'll feed in if I can.
No worries. So, and what Alison's referring to is care.data going back to 2010 when Andrew Ladsley came in and sort of announced to the world that he had this wonderful idea of how to drive up, sort of economic use of data, and it was to facilitate access to loads of NHS data for commercial use. Well, it went down to the short version is went down very badly, and the result of that, the government got so burnt with that is exactly why health as a topic was specifically excluded from the research powers in the Digital Economy Act. If commercial so I think what James is talking about is two sort of slightly different things. He's talking about researchers accessing commercial data, which I'm presuming would be done on the same principles as the Digital Economy Act, so de-identified data.
Yep.
And if it's commercial use of data, then commercial organisations can already access data through the SRS. They just have to comply with exactly the same principles that everybody else does, so they don't get access to any identifiable information. And the principle behind the research access has to be in the public good, so it can't just be for commercial gain, for example.
Thanks very much, Emma.
And Alison, if I might just on that, I mean, you and I have obviously had that conversation very briefly at RC22 about what was IDS going to do in terms of bringing in some health data. So we all know that obviously DEA is not a sort of a prelude to being able to bring in NHSD data, for example. I mean, that's separate, but there are conversations going on in that space to bring in the health and the public health research database, and obviously what we're having to do there in terms of NHSD, who I think they're the owners of some of that data, is to provide security assurance. So they don't have their main concern is about the fact that we're obviously in the beta phases. What's the capabilities of the platform? What's the security assurances we can provide? We're having those conversations. They seem to be generally quite supportive of what we're doing, and hopefully that will unlock some of the data. There are a lot of conversations there to be had, because we know that social researchers will want health data brought in, but more important, well, not more importantly, but on a side to that, we also within ONS need to look at, well, what have we got in terms of health data which we can bring on initially, that if we link it to census 2021 data, for example, mortality data linked to census 21, what's the wealth of opportunities, policy outputs that unlocks? That's quite a big thing, actually. I mean, that would be very useful for policy analysts, and we're certainly finding that in terms of the discussions we're having across government. Just to make you all aware that there's some the things that we are considering, but yes, there's a lot of work that's going to be going into those conversations with NHSD and making sure that we can get some of that wider health data, because that is obviously important for analysts too. And not to jump onto your sharing there, Alison, but on the next question I note from Charlie, I think, are there plans to look at that DFE looked after children and data? I'll be honest with you, I don't. If I cast my mind back to the list of data catalogue that we're looking at, I don't think so at the moment, but we are in those very early stages of identifying data that we think is of strategic importance. So what I would say to you is use those contact details when they're put out, or if you've got them, send me an email. You know, really happy to have the conversation, understand what the ask is, what's the policy question that helps answer. And we can certainly look at trying to feed that user research into that wider strategic engagement data acquisition piece, which is going on within DGO. So there's a specific reason why you think that's useful, then certainly. But in the long term, you know, there's a lot of DFE data, DWP data, HMRC data that we would obviously wish to acquire. Emma?
Right then.
Yeah, and the looked after children is in the eChild link data set that is currently within the Secure Research Service that we're working very hard with NHS Digital and partners to open wider research access to. So yeah, it is within that data set. So
in that case, then that will form part of the, apologies my ignorance there, but that will form part of that wider piece. Tony Chappell, really good in IDS, is drawing on in terms of that SRS to IDS migration, not just of projects, but those critical data assets too, and data. So I'll certainly make a note of that and have the conversations useful to know. Thanks for that, Emma.
Right, next, the last question we've got on here is about, says, will ONS publish any new statistics to become deliverable once data sets are merged? So that's the question about publish statistics.
It's a good question, actually. I mean, I imagine
responsibility.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking about some of the outcomes that might be derived from building those integrated data assets, then I have to take that back and find out. I'm not too sure. I would have thought so, but I must admit my ignorance. I'm not sure the answer to that one, but I'll find out and send that in response to providing the slides as well.
But in terms of access to the underlying individual level data, the principle will be, won't it, James, that if once you've got Digital Economy Act accreditation and the whole transfer over from the SRS to the IDS has happened, the principle is that any data that is accessible to government researchers will also be accessible to academic researchers as well, isn't it?
Absolutely, and you know, I think that it's fair to say that the Secure Research Service, it was sort of created with non-government analysts in mind. IDS is about trying to combine the non-government analysts with the government analysts. So absolutely, you know, this should be a platform for all, as I said in the presentation. So you're absolutely right. Yeah.
I mean, this question here is about non-academics and non-government analysts. So
again, there's no difference in terms of what field you come from. So you could be from third sector organisation, as long as your project is in the public good and it's scientifically sound and it can be answered from the data, you can apply to access it.
Right, thank you. We've got 1 minute left, so I think I don't think there's anything else in the chat. So I finish by thanking Emma and James for their talks and for people for coming and contributing important questions. This will end up on the RSS website, and if you've got further questions, obviously we know that both James and Emma are interested to receive them, and we will certainly make sure that we include the address to which the question should be sent. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for coming. And I think we've had a very interesting session.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for all the great questions.
Thank you, Emma, for filling in for me while I was late. Appreciate that. Thank you all.
No problem. Bye.
Bye.